Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SC20 Virtual SCC Reproducibility Challenge webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about the application and the information around the webinar. Let's go to the next slide, please. So first, welcome, and we have a few announcements. First of all, as you can see, the webinar schedule, we're going to be continuing to have webinars, and the schedule is there. Some ground rules and some announcements. Announcements first. Please get your advisor to fill out your information for the Google group. We need the team info to make sure that everyone gets on that, because there's a lot of important information on the Google group. For instance, there is an Azure MPI tuning workshop that I am sure all of you will want to attend, and then there's information on the Google group about that. As well, the Google group will be the main way that you contact any of the application experts, but for reproducibility, in particular, the authors of the paper, if you email them directly, they will just respond that you need to email the Google group, and then you will have to email the Google group to get a response. So it's probably quicker and just to email the Google group for any questions that you might have about really anything with the cluster competition. For today, there's just two quick notes. We're going to wait for each person to finish speaking before we ask for questions. So please write down your questions. Open a little notepad or something on your computer if you have a question, and then we'll call for questions after each speaker. And then the second thing is, please ask questions. We really want to have your questions. This entire activity is self-evident for us because we've created it, but we may miss some important details that you need to know. So if you have any questions, please ask them in turn. Can we go to the next slide, please? So here are our speakers for today. I am the SC20 Reproducibility Challenge Chair, and this is in order of appearance. Next up, Michaela Topher, who founded the reproducibility effort at SC and has been supporting it for the last five or 6 years. She'll be talking to you about the importance of reproducibility. Beth Plale, who is the SC20 Reproducibility Chair. Someone needs to mute. I'm getting a little echo. Okay. Yep. Okay, we're good. Beth Plale is the SC20 Reproducibility Chair, and she's responsible for all of the reproducibility effort that happens at SC20, including the technical program and this challenge and the journal special issue that we'll talk a little bit about later. Veronica Vergara and Scott Michael are the two virtual SCC co-chairs, and they'll be talking about the cluster competition. And then Mert and Tekken are two authors of the Reproducibility Challenge paper, the MemXCT paper. And they're gonna, Mert will present information about exactly what he did in the application and talk to you about its applications for science in general. And with that, let's go to the next slide, and Michaela can take it away.
Hi, everybody. I'm very thrilled to be here. Can you hear me? So if there is any problem with the audio, please let us know so that we can fix it. It's, as I said, a pleasure to be here. And it is, every year is a little bit more exciting. There is new people, new teams. And so every year we are presented with the challenge of why are we doing this? Why is that we look at aspect of reproducibility in HPC? And this is a very good question. But to answer that question, let's look outside our community and look at what our colleagues in other disciplines, in other sciences are doing, and look at a discipline like chemistry, physics, where we see that when our colleagues publish paper, for example, in Nature or in Science or in other journals, what we have is the results of experiments, these experimental results that are done, for example, in wet lab. And the question that we have is, do we trust these results? They are published in a very good paper, so we could say, yes, we published them. But beyond that publication, what we have is that these experiments are normally done over and over for multiple times, so that there is a convergence of the repetition of the experiments. Next, please. Another aspect of what we have in a paper article in journal like Nature and Science is that the experimental process that generate these results are rigorously documented step by step. And so, next, please. If we have a rigorous documentation, then what we can do next is we can enable the other scientists to replicate our work. That means that if we look at that and we think in terms of who are the other scientists, can be scientists in other labs, could be junior scientists, people like us, an undergraduate school. So a rigorous documentation enables the scientists to replicate the work that has been published. And even further, they can build new discovery. So this is what happens in many disciplines in sciences. So let's change a little bit these questions and say, well, what if we replace the experimental results and experimental testing with computational results and computational testing? Well, in that case, then we go in our community, in the computational science and high performance computing community in particular, and we have to think whether we can replicate this process of repeating computational simulations and their results, whether we are documenting our process rigorously, and the final goal is whether we can share with others, so that when we share, we enable other of our colleagues to replicate, reproduce, and build upon. And so this is a big responsibility, and you are helping us to make this possible, because what is your goal is to replicate and reproduce some of the results of a paper in SC, and by doing that, you are validating the conclusion and you are building new discovery through the replication itself, because you are replicating the work on different platforms. So you have a big responsibility, and you have also a big service for our community in replicating this paper. This is not the first year we are doing this, and so in the next slides, Beth will tell you what is the story of this effort, and what is your role, and how important is your role for our community. Thank you, Beth.
Before we move to Beth, just want to check to see if there's any questions for Michaela. Okay, well, let's move on then. Thank you, Michaela.
Great.
We appreciate it.
Good. Yeah, thank you, Michaela. I'm Beth Flaley, and I'm the SC Transparency and Reproducibility Chair. Thank you all for joining the reproducibility effort. As Michaela said, we appreciate your enthusiasm and your your willingness to be part of something greater here with respect to reproducibility for high performance computing. I'm going to take you through 6 steps, and it's going to be in the form of a life cycle. So there's that circle there. So I'm starting in the upper left, and I'll work my way around over a series of steps. So we're starting, and this is where you all fit in. So we start with the selected paper. Researchers submit their papers to SC. It's a peer-reviewed, distinguished peer-reviewed conference. The papers are reviewed by colleagues, and a set of them are accepted. As a part of that, what the authors will do is not only will they have the content of their papers, but they will also add an appendix to the paper that describes details about how the results were created, and this is valuable information for you. So that includes the art of what's called this artifact descriptor, and then computational results. In the process of submitting these results and having their papers reviewed, they may, if the information they provided rises to a level of quality, they may get a badge. The Association for Computing Machinery assigns badges, and one of those badges is an artifact available badge. They will get a badge for their paper, so it shows up on the ACM Digital Library with this badge, and that's a nice distinction. So this would have been Mert and Tikin's paper in 2019, where it got accepted. It was well done. The appendices was well done. They've got a badge. And now the next step, it's SC20. You all are in the picture, and do I next step? Nope, there it goes. Okay, so of all those papers that were selected, one of these is reviewed by a committee and selected as appropriate for you all to reproduce. And that too is a selective process, and it includes the willingness of the authors themselves to be part of the process to make your experience a success. So one of those papers gets selected, and again, it's a paper from SC19, and we're now in SC20. Next. So then the committee then will work with the authors to make sure that the materials that you have are sufficient for your task at hand, because you may work on a slightly different data set. So instead of working on something pertaining to the moon, you'll work on something pertaining to Mars. So there's the committee is doing work to kind of ready the replication effort on your behalf. Next. And then the actual activity takes place, and this would be at SC20. You're joining us in the unfortunate circumstance of much of this being virtual, but we're all, the SC is moving forward as energetically as possible to retain an experience for everybody. So you will be part of that. Next step. And then you as your competition, as a result of your competition, you will write a report of your reproducibility efforts, and those reports then are then really they're beneficial to that original paper, because now that original paper by Mert and Tikin has had its results reproduced. So you're contributing back to the author, but you're also, and we can do the final step here, you're also, because you're doing your own report, and that report on your reproducibility results is a valuable augmenting to Mert and Tikin's original paper. There's a distinguished journal in our field called IEEE TPDS that is taking that paper from the SC19, the chosen paper, plus your reports, those that rise to a level of quality, and those are all put together so that a reader can get the journal article themselves and read the individual reports and read your reports on your results, and your results are commented on in that journal paper. So now the journal paper is richer. The original the SC paper and journal paper are richer papers, and your individual reports are given DOIs, or unique persistent IDs, and accessible themselves as significant intellectual contributions. So this is the whole cycle is a cycle that that involves you as students in an important demonstration of reproducibility that overall strengthens the supercomputing technical program as a whole, because each one of the papers that then appears is now strengthened by what is learned from your activities. So thank you all very much, and welcome to SC20 Student Challenge.
Okay, I didn't see any questions in the chat, but someone also notified me there's a little hand raise button, so we can use that as well. Any questions though? Okay. Well, thank you, Beth. We really appreciate you spending some time to talk to us today about this. All right, Scott and Veronica, hopefully just Veronica, is next.
Oh, if only you were so lucky. But it's me. Hi, everyone. I'm Scott Michael, one of the co-chairs of the VSCC this year. Thanks, everyone, for joining. We're all going to get to know each other a lot more virtually this year. And so I wanted to take a minute here just to give a brief overview of the parts of the competition and sort of how the reproducibility application fits in, and things that you might want to think about as you're approaching your preparation for the reproducibility app that are a little bit different from the other types of applications. So as you are well aware, we have 4 applications that you'll all be working on in the challenge, plus the standard benchmarks that we do. This year, we're doing GROMACS, CESM, this application, MemXCT, which is the reproducibility application, and a mystery application. The reproducibility application is a little bit unique in that the scoring is really going to be based on the strength of the report that you submit. So, and there's a lot of different aspects that go into the report. Now, Stephen will probably comment a little bit more on this, and as the application lead, along with Mert and Tekin, they'll determine exactly, what parts of the report get, what scores, but it is different from the other applications in that you're not just submitting results from a run or a benchmark or something like that. You really need to put some thought into how you construct this report. So a few recommendations just in having worked on both the reproducibility application and applications team in past years. It's never too early to start thinking about your report, how you're going to structure it, and what pieces you want to put into it. You, before the competition starts, should know a lot about your infrastructure. Particularly in this case, in the case of this year, you'll have had the opportunity to be on the Azure cloud, to have experimented with a lot of the infrastructure, both software and hardware, and you can use that to really plan your experiments in advance and even start writing up some of the details of your particular choices. Another thing to think about is, as you're planning those experiments, plan for contingencies. You should have a target that you're trying to shoot for to do the reproduction, but also know that what is the minimum amount of computation or experiments that you need to do to convince yourself that you've reproduced the results. If you're not able to get to one or more experiments, which ones will you be able to leave behind and still have a viable report? The last thing I'd like to emphasize is that the key that we've always focused on for these reproducibility reports is not for you to say, yes, I was able to reproduce what was in the paper, but instead to do your best to reproduce the results. And if you are unable to, come up with a plausible explanation and really pinpoint what the key differences are between what the experiment that that you've done and the experiment that the authors did to sort of draw out what parts of the paper you might have been struggling to reproduce. So I think that this is a unique and very interesting challenge and part of the student cluster competition, and it is one that really requires you to start thinking about it now. So I encourage everyone to do that and really enjoy the competition.
Great. Do we have any questions for Scott? I don't see any in the chat.
One quick comment I just wanted to make sure that you please ask your advisors to submit the information. As Steven mentioned in the beginning, that's how we're going to communicate any information about the applications, and that's how you can ask questions about reproducibility application or any of the other 2 applications that are publicly known right now. So please make sure that it's filled out so we can invite you to the Google group.
Great. Thank you, Veronica. Okay, I think we don't have any questions, so let's move on to our guest, our main guest speaker today, which is Mert. Mert will be talking about both his experiences and his in the application that he wrote and the paper that he wrote in his process. Real quick, there is a question. It says, if you score highly in the competition, it is expected that the report will be published. And I think I'm probably the best person to answer that. So the answer for that is not necessarily, but it's a good indicator. So typically what we do is we take the scores from the student cluster competition when picking the journal reports. We take the scores from the cluster competition and we look for the top 6 to 10, depending on how good the reports are and how good the scores are. And then we request that those people go through a shepherding process to try and move the work from an undergraduate level to a journal quality report. That works sometimes, it doesn't always work. And so it's not guaranteed that you'll get published until that shepherding is done when we do a final review to find out if it truly is journal quality or not. I hope that answers that question. And if there's more questions, please post them in the chat, and we'll get to them after after Mert does his discussion. Thank you, Mert.
Okay. Thanks, Stefan. Okay. Can you hear me? My microphone is working?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So, yeah, I'd like to talk to you about the history of the applications and a little bit of technical details, because you will need those in your report or for understanding the paper better. So you can take notes, and I don't know if, Stefan, are you going to put these slides online?
This whole webinar is recorded.
Okay, great.
So we'll put that online, yes.
But still, taking notes will be very useful in your reports, because I will also talk about some, architectural things and performance bottlenecks of the application. So those will be very important for you to put in your report. So, but this application actually started with my summer internship in 2018, and the picture shows the electron accelerator at Argonne, and my office was inside of this accelerator. And I was in a pretty much interdisciplinary position where my objective was to create images from the scanning experiments in this electron accelerator. But the problem is the images are, the data is so big, the amount is terabyte scale data, and producing image from that data takes a supercomputer. So there was, so they hired me as an intern because I was like in the intersection of imaging science and also high performance computing, supercomputing, etc. So I'm just trying to tell you as maybe most of you are undergrads, but take any opportunity you can find, because I would never know my internship will produce 2 SC papers and I would be a subject of a student reproducibility challenge, actually. So yeah, the moral of the story is take any opportunity, especially during summers. Don't waste your summers. Go to hackathons, go to meetings, go to conferences, be a student volunteer, etc. Because you will never know what's going to happen, who you'll meet, or what work will you do. So next slide, please. So Argonne, I told you that ring was a light source, which is basically an electron accelerator, but it also has supercomputers. And actually, that electron accelerator is called the Advanced Photon Source, and it's like a national facility, actually. So a lot of people from everywhere in the US and also in the world come to that facility to take measurements and produce images. And also a complementary facility is the Leadership Computing Facility, where they have, like top 10 fastest supercomputers in the world. Also, they're planning to build a new supercomputer called Aurora next year, or maybe, next year, which will be the fastest one in the world. So Argonne is really like a unique place that you can do interdisciplinary research and you can do real science with real applications. So it was the best investment for me so far, like summer investment. Next slide, please. So let me talk to you about the imaging applications first. So MemXCT stands for Memory-Centric XCT. XCT is, computer tomography. X stands for X-ray computing tomography. So these are some image that is produced by the code we developed with Tekin. So it can be applied to many different domains like medical imaging, material science, some like chip imaging for quality control, etc. But the problem is it produces a lot of data because these are very large objects compared to the resolution. When you want to go to nanometer resolution, even 1 centimeter object is a huge task. The object image reconstruction is a huge task. Next slide, please. No, yes. And it's not going to be better because the advancement in light sources is faster than advancement in computational sources. What I mean is, computers, they become 2 times faster approximately in 18 months, according to the Moore's law. Well, it's arguably Moore's law is ending, but there's new technologies coming, new memory technologies, GPUs, etc. But you can roughly say computer speeds doubles every 18 months. However, the light sources are advancing like, so the data rate, it depends on the brilliance of the light source, and it triples every 18 months. And actually, they're going to upgrade advanced photon source at Argonne next year, and it will produce much more data. So currently the data produced is about 10 gigabytes per second, and it will be more in the future. So there's a discrepancy between computational resources and also data produced. So obviously we need some efficient algorithms and scalable algorithms to tackle this difficult task of processing this kind of high data rates, maybe in near real time or real time. So next, please. So first of all, the paper talks about the data acquisition a little bit, and it's pretty straightforward. There's one X-ray beam, as you can see in the figure, and there's a CCD camera detector, and there's a sample which is rotated, and mathematically, the problem to solve is basically linear problem, which can be formalized as AX equals B. It's the most simple form of problems, maybe you will see. in your engineering career. And B here stands for the measurement, which is called a sinogram. So sinogram is the measurement as seen on the upper right corner. It's basically the measurement at the detector. So when you look at it, it may not be anything meaningful to you, but it's okay because it's the measurement. And A matrix stands for the imaging system, and X is the tomogram you want to get. So tomogram is the result. It's the image you will see, like at the bottom right corner. In this case, it's a shale rock. So it's just a very simple example of an image. So next slide, please. So there is many, there's a plethora of ways to solve problems like AX equals B. However, the modern solver very often they follow an iterative solution approach. It's because of many things like noise in the measurements, ill condition of the problem, regularization methods, etc. So there is like a huge contribution from applied mathematicians or engineers in the last 10 or 20 years about this iterative image reconstruction methods. So this figure really simplifies it. By the way, MemXCT is iterative. It follows the iterative reconstruction. So when you run the code, you will see some iterations and the solution converges. So when you see the solution converges, then you will be confident that the code is working correctly. So iterative solution philosophy is basically you just have a forward model, which is a computational model, which simulates X-rays going through the object. That's called the forward model, number one. And then you run the forward model, and you compare the simulation result with the actual measurement, which will not match, obviously, in your first iteration. And then you don't stop. And then you run the reverse model, which is called the back projection. So reverse model is basically transpose of the forward model, mathematical transpose, matrix transpose of the forward model, and you keep on do that until you refine the object in each iteration until your actual measurement and your simulation matches, and basically that's where you stop, and that's the output data. So typically you want to do like 27 or 30 iterations to converge to the actual accurate result sufficiently. But we will give you more instructions to how to run the code. So next slide, please. So these show shows the matrices that I'm talking to you about. So these are sparsity patterns of two matrices. One is projection matrix and back projection matrix. And believe it or not, these matrices they basically are the imaging system of yours. Mathematically, it's just a bunch of numbers, sparse numbers, because these matrices are not full matrices. These are sparse matrices. And so memory-centric approach produces these matrices, constructs these matrices, and explicitly stores them in memory. So in many applications, these matrices are multiplied on the fly. However, it's not always more efficient to do that on the fly. A few applications may do them algorithmically faster, but in generally you just do more computation when you want to multiply these matrices on the fly, because there is also a lot of there may be a lot of computational inefficiencies to do these on the fly, because in each iteration you create the same matrix from scratch again and again and again, which yields to a lot of redundant computations you do. However, when you produce them and store them in memory, you can reuse them from memory, which will save you a lot of computations, but gives you a lot of other problems to solve. Next slide, please. Because the performance of many sparse algorithms hits to the memory wall problem. So memory wall problem is is a very relevant problem today, because the CPUs or GPUs, the technology improves like very rapidly with the Moore's law again. So the right graph shows you the, again, doubling of performance every 1.5 years. However, DRAM technology, it's very slow compared to GPU technology. So the latency, which stands for taking a data from memory and bring it to the CPU register, it's called the latency. The time is called the latency, and latency doesn't drop as fast as the CPU, the how CPUs become faster. So it doubles, the performance of DRAM doubles every 10 years, which is much slower than CPU. That's why that's why a lot of algorithms currently suffer from this memory wall problem, especially the ones which are sparse, which has some sparse structures, sparse matrices, etc. So people come up with many different ways to breach this memory wall problem. By the way, this will be the memory bottleneck will be your main performance bottleneck in the application. So the performance you get in your own architecture depends mainly how memory how the memory is good in your application, in your cluster architecture. So people come up a few really clever ideas, like a hierarchical memory architecture. They come with some prefetching algorithms to exploit this architecture that are implemented on both hardware and software. But you can help these prefetching or caching protocols or algorithms by manually design your algorithms to help those hardware or software implementations to breach the memory wall as much as possible. Next slide, please. So one is, for example, one performance optimization we done in the paper is these orderings that provides you data locality. I think I want to skip these slides a little bit faster because they're already in the paper. So can we go to the next slide, please? Next slide. Yeah, when you use those ordering, you change your sparsity pattern and of your sparse matrices and provide more data locality that utilizes cache lines and uses those memory hierarchical memory architecture in a more efficient way. So next slide, please. Another one is multi-stage buffering. So this is important because this will be a tuning parameter for you in your application. So this can be applied to both GPUs and CPUs. And so to compute an output partition, which is 64 by 64 in this case. Next slide, please. You need to have you need to access to Tomogram domain data, and this blue shades of blue shows the memory access footprint to compute that sinogram partition. And you can see some of the data are accessed more than others, and these are irregular accesses, and there are redundant accesses because once the data, one data is accessed can be accessed more than 100 times, which is totally redundant. So instead, next slide, please. We allocate a buffer. So on GPUs, it's in shared memory. On CPUs, it's going to be most probably in L1 cache or L2 cache. So we load the data to the buffer and then access irregularly from that buffer. And the average data reused from the buffer in this case is 46.63, which means you go to the DRAM and you reduce the latency overhead by 46 times, which buys you a lot of performance, actually. Next slide, please. So the problem is this buffer may be too large in large problems, and you may not have enough shared memory or L2 cache to store to allocate this buffer. That's why there's multiple stagings, and in this case there are 4 stagings. And one staging, stage 1 loads some certain data to the buffer, and then irregular access happens to that buffer, and then stage 2 and stage 3 and so on. So this is called multi-stage input buffering, which will be a tuning parameter in your code, and you need to find the right buffer size for your architecture. It may be so that's the tuning part of your one of your tasks is tuning for the best performance in your own architecture. So next slide, please. So there are different architectures in supercomputing. For example, we have in our paper there are results on Blue Waters, which was in University of Illinois, but it's retired now. It's a very old one. But it has 1 GPU per node. There's Theta, which is KNL-based, Intel-based architecture, which has 64 cores in each CPU and very large memory as well. It's like 2016 machine. There's also new computers like Summit, which is deployed in 2018, 2019. They have 6 GPUs per node, so we call them FAT nodes. And there's Aurora, which will come on 2021, which will be the first exascale supercomputer, which also will include fast nodes with 6 GPUs per node. So our algorithm is actually can be tuned for different types of architectures, and you're expected to tune these few parameters like buffer size, like block size, etc., for your own architecture, for your own GPUs or CPU models or compilers. So next one, please. For example, this shows the performance on KNL. So this is also in the paper. So there are 4 artificial data sets we tried, from smaller data sets to larger data sets, and you can see the performance optimizations buys you some gigaflops throughput, speed up, like 4 times, 1.6 times, 3.8 times, etc. And so these 4 data sets will have different memory footprints. The smallest is 430 megabytes. The largest is 180 gigabytes. So 180 gigabytes will obviously won't fit in your GPU. So you want to try smaller data sets first, which will fit in your GPUs. By the way, we will open these artificial data sets for your testing, like compilation and running for your testing period. And the code also reports the gigaflops performance. So you may end up with higher gigaflops performance than here because KNLs are pretty old. Most probably you will run your code on a newer CPU. So you will see like more than 200 gigaflops, most probably. But when you have more memory on CPU architectures, you can try larger data sets like ADS4, which has 180 gigabytes of memory footprint. It will fit in your node, most probably, on your CPU node. But GPUs, well, at least, most probably you won't be able to fit ADS3 on your GPU because 28 gigabytes is larger than many many state-of-the-art GPU memory capacity. Next slide, please. So in the paper, there's also like a performance figure for 3 different GPUs, K80, P100, V100. Most probably you will have access to V100, most of you. So you can try ADS1 and ADS2 at V100. And you are supposed to get exactly the same gigaflops. Because I tried on different V100s with different compiler versions or and I get pretty much the same result. It should be about 200 gigaflops when you run the code on V100 GPU. So this is one thing that you want to make sure you properly tuned. By the way, all of these results are tuned. Properly tuned your the code and get the expected performance. And if you don't get this performance, why? That's the question you want to answer in your report. Next slide, please. One other thing you can do if you have more than one node is scaling. So this shows strong scaling, where you have a fixed problem. In this case, there are 2 strong scaling experiments. One is on the left, on the right is on Blue Waters, on the left is on Theta, and on the left it's much larger problem, which scales better actually. And on the right, there's a smaller problem which scales poorly because of a very simple reason. If you have, let's say you have a birthday cake and you want to slice it, and if you have a larger birthday cake, you can have more slices to serve more people, right? But if you have a very tiny birthday cake, the slices might be at most, number of slices might be at most 4 or something. So that's a rule of thumb in these scaling experiments. If you have a larger problem, it's easier to scale. If you have a smaller problem, it's difficult to scale. However, you should see if you scale up to 16 nodes, for example, even you don't produce exactly the same results, you should see somewhat kind of similar results in terms of the trends, the scaling trends. For example, on CPU, you would expect a superlinear speed up, like in because of some, when you partition the problem more per CPU problem, it becomes smaller and it starts to fit into cache completely. Then you may get a superlinear speed up, which is not intuitional actually. However, on GPUs, you may get sublinear speed up because basically your the workload per GPU becomes smaller when you partition the problem more and more. Next slide, please. There is another scaling concept which is called weak scaling, and in this case, you increase the problem size as you increase the number of processors you use by keeping per process workload constant as much as possible. But it's not easy to do this weak scaling experiments because you may not have real life measurements for all of these different kind of problems. However, that's why we use artificial data sets for these weak scaling. We may make these open for your weak scaling experiments as well. So here we scale from a single node to 4K node, and the problem. So because of the high computational complexity, the workload is scales with the cube of data. So if we double the data, basically we need to perform like 8 times more computation. That's why the number of nodes goes like 1, 8, 64, 512, and 4K, etc. So we will provide you more instructions to how to use these artificial data sets and how to perform these scaling experiments. So next slide, please. So we also have a follow-up paper. We extended exactly the same methods on 3D. And you can see that the memory footprints can be very large because of this memory-centric approach that I explained you like 10 minutes ago. So it can go up to 10 terabyte of memory footprint, which can only take a supercomputer, and most probably you won't be able to solve this kind of large problems. But we're thinking of Shale Rock, which has 120 gigabytes of memory footprint, which may fit on your small number of nodes or in your clusters in the cloud. So next slide, please. So wait, can I go back to the previous slide? I'll take 2 more minutes and then let you go. So when you have so all of these previous slides were only for 2D problem. So in 3D problem, we have, so it's much more challenging because of a phenomena called the curse of dimensionality. You basically you're dealing with input measurement cube, data cube, and output data cube, where you have much more data. So you can see the IO data footprint is now terabytes, but most of real life applications are 3D. So in the 2019 paper, we developed those methods for 2D, which are very efficient actually. And you will run the code, you will try to reproduce the results, but actually most of real life problems are 3D. It's much more challenging, but we can also use the 3D nature as our advantage. Can we go to the next slide? So, okay, we take 3D as an advantage by fusing some computations, like the same computations, to minimize the memory access. So maybe a few of you might heard about roofline analysis, where you have arithmetic intensity on the x-axis and gigaflops in the y-axis. So the memory bandwidth bound is basically your performance bottleneck. So theoretically, you cannot do better than the memory bandwidth bound in this case. And your algorithm will be memory bandwidth bound. So in your report, you want to include how much memory bandwidth you utilized. And if you utilize like 90% or maybe higher amount of memory bandwidth, then you basically are doing well, and that's your theoretical performance bottleneck, and you cannot do better than that. So I highly recommend you to use a CPU profiler or a GPU profiler to look at those numbers like memory bandwidth, cache utilization, etc., access patterns, to profile your algorithm and find the bottleneck and tune the performance parameters accordingly. So last comment I would like to make is one of the new things we did in our SC paper, this year's SC paper, is using mixed precision. And you can see in large problems, it's communication bound. But when you use mixed precision, you basically move less amount of data. And also, when your algorithm is memory bound, you basically move less amount of data when you use half precision rather than double precision, for example. And this buys you a lot of performance, actually, which is shown in the bottom. There are two cases here. One is shell reconstruction on 4 nodes, which has 24 GPUs. And there's also a charcoal data set on 128 nodes, which is 768 GPUs. These are on Summit, by the way. These results are taken in Summit. And you're welcome to come to my virtual talk during the conference in November. If you want to hear more about these kind of X-ray imaging algorithms and scaling, providing data reuse, making arithmetic intensity higher, etc., and how to overcome these kind of performance bottlenecks like memory wall problem. So I think that's all I can tell you at this point. So I will leave to Stefan for some final remarks.
Great. Thank you so much, Mert. Had to find that mute button. So I'm going to talk a little bit about your reproducibility reports and kind of what to expect. I'm going to paste quickly a link to all of the reports from past years. It's not all of the reports, it's actually the journals. But let me put that in chat real quick. So you can download that if you'd like. It has 3 years of reproducibility reports in that zip file. What I'm going to be summarizing here is basically what the reports have mostly looked like. So you're going to describe your architecture, you're going to describe the setup of your experiment, you're going to describe the design, what you think will give you the most accurate replication, etc. You're going to plot the outcomes of your experiment in the same way that Mert plotted his, and you'll describe the differences between the paper's results and your experiment's results. I think an important thing to think of is because most of the work was done on KNL. If you use a CPU, I would be really surprised if you got the exact same numbers. I would expect the curve to be very similar, but what we want you to do is unpack that. Why would that be? What is interesting about KNL that might be different than a Skylake or a Cascade Lake processor or AMD processor that you might get on Azure? So those are the important things I'd like to look at. I'd like for you to look at and really think about. And I think it's going to require you asking some people exactly what's going on. Certainly as an undergraduate, I had no idea what would cause differences in reproducing an application like that. But I think the point is to try and discover what that is. So, so for preparation, take a look at the reports from last year. Any part that you can write before the competition, you should. The competition is a very intense time, and writing sometimes takes a little peace and quiet. You know, you could even outline the sections that you don't know what the content is going to go in. You can put what you expect and then edit later. So I would urge you to start on that early and iterate. Ask the people at your local university center, or you know, maybe on Exceed, or just people you know. And if you don't know anyone, you can email me, and I'll find someone to talk about architecture with you. But I definitely want you to ask and think about what might be the reasons for the difference in speed or results, or any differences you see, really. Some hints on where to look: maybe architecture, scale, software stack, interconnect. There's a lot of places, and of course Mert gave you a big hint that this code is memory bound, so that's probably something that you would probably need to look at. And also do some strong and weak scaling. You should do strong and weak scaling for every application, if I'm being honest, just so you understand the characteristics of the application. I think at a certain point, this competition is all about understanding the characteristics of the application and matching that with the characteristics of the architecture that you end up using. So concentrate on that. I think it will pay off quite a bit. As Steve said, we'll post that reproducibility special issue link within the Google group as well. And just because I know Veronica would want me to, I'm going to remind you one more time to make sure that your advisor fills out your team, so all your team can be on the Google group as soon as possible. Next slide, please. Okay, we have come to the end. Do you have any questions for Mert, which I just skipped over? So sorry about that, Mert. Or comments, please let us know. Now's your time to communicate with us. There's a lot of knowledge for people on this call, and we spent a lot of time putting this together. So please ask questions if you have any. Okay, that's a great question. So the question is, will we have access to the MemXCT code? Yes, you will. Mert has been working very hard on it. We expect to have that out to you within the next 2 weeks. And it will be available. Yep, no problem. Anyone else have any questions?
So just a small remark. We're planning to open the CPU code first, and then the GPU code, just for your planning.
Yeah, and a comment is, we're not going. So this code is it's actually a relatively simple makefile, but all the makefiles will be for the machines that Mert ran on, and which he just described in his talk. So you're going to need to find out what compilers, what MPIs, etc. work for your architecture, and you're going to have to modify those makefiles to make sure that that works correctly.
And there'll be also an MPI workshop soon, right? For SCC.
For tuning on Azure, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, highly recommended.
And so another question says, there was mention of data sets during the testing period. When exactly is that? We'll release the data sets at the test data sets at the same time as we release the code. So that's in the next 2 weeks. Any other questions? Okay, well then I guess we'll end here. Thank you, Mert, so much for talking us through your application. Thank you for all the other speakers and all the students that joined us. We can't wait to see you at the competition, and have a great day.